2024 has come and gone. The year went by very fast, but it was actually a pretty good reading year for me. And this is going to be my annual video where I discuss the best books that I read in the previous year. This is the best books I read in 2024. Now, it was kind of a weird reading year for me. I read a lot of books I wasn't really expecting to read. Then I read a lot that have been on my radar for a long time. And yeah, I found a lot of great books this year. But before diving into it, this isn't sponsored, but I do quickly want to mention that I completely revamped my merch shop. And now that I switched over to Fourth Wall, the quality is so much higher. I am so happy with this hoodie. This is an embroidered Captured in Words logo and just such a high quality hoodie overall. And if you didn't know, I hired a lettering artist and logo designer from Sicily, Italy to design the Captured in Words logo. They used a calligrapher's folded pen, I believe, to design the logo. I believe that's what it was called. It's been a while now, but I've always been very happy with the Captured in Words logo. So if you want that on some merch, you can do so. I am gonna put up some new designs like later in the year, but as of right now, we just have the logo on some merch. Go check it out if you want to help support the channel. Anyways, before I dive into the best books that I read, I want to give some honorable mentions, starting with Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Now, if I finished this book in 2024, this would be like pretty much at the top. I am really loving this book, and I was not expecting to love it this much. I just haven't finished it yet. That's the only reason it's not on this list. I'm only about halfway, maybe not even halfway through this book, but it is really good. And I'm not someone who is really that into Westerns besides playing like Red Dead Redemption 2. That's one of my favorite games, but I'm not really that into Westerns. Lonesome Dove, though, if you're also not into Westerns, you should still read Lonesome Dove. I don't know how Larry McMurtry does it, but he is such a pro when it comes to character development and just the relationships between all the characters. I thought that Joe Abercrombie and Robin Hobb were the best of the best when it came to character work. Little did I know, Lonesome Dove has some of the best characters that I've ever read. The hardships they go through, the struggles, the villains that he writes are so great as well, but they all feel incredibly realistic, and I don't think I've read characters like this to this degree. I'm also just really surprised at how engaged I am reading this book. I've heard a lot of great things about Lonesome Dove, okay? But I don't know, for some reason I thought it wouldn't really be for me. I was wrong. So as soon as I finish this book, I'm gonna have to make a video going more in depth on all my thoughts. But yeah, that gets an honorable mention for sure. And this one isn't really an honorable mention. I just want to mention it because I know people are going to be asking me. I haven't finished Wind and Truth Book 5 in the Stormlight Archive yet. When it comes to the Stormlight Archive, I really like to take my time reading them, or else I end up just getting burnt out because they are ridiculously long, and Wind and Truth is so far kind of mixed for me. There's a lot of things I like about it. There's also some things I don't like about it. So it's taking me a while to get through, and I'm probably gonna take my time more so than other people as well, because I like to take notes when I'm reading the Stormlight Archive for my in-depth summaries. So it's gonna take a while, but I will put up a full spoiler-free review for that book as soon as I finish it, and I'm also going to be making an in-depth summary for it at some point. Now, just to be clear, these are all books that I read in 2024. They're not necessarily books that released in 2024. Actually, a lot of them didn't release in 2024. And also, these are all going to be unranked. I'm not putting any ranking on them. It was hard enough to find all the best books that I read in the year. Without further ado, these are the best books I read in 2024. Starting off strong with The Will of the Many by James Islington. If this was a ranked list, this would be near the #1 spot, if not the Crown King, because this book is a must-read. It's one of my all-time favorites now, and I cannot wait for book 2. Talk about a well-paced novel. You think something's coming, and then Something else appears and completely changes the direction of the plot. There's so many twists and turns in this book. I was surprised so often. This is the deluxe edition of The Will of the Many. The publisher sent me this. Huge thank you, because this is a beautiful, beautiful edition. I do think the pages should have been gold though, instead of yellow, because yellow just reminds me of like those really old copies of books that have yellowed pages. And gold would just go with the font. Anyways, enough rambling. I need to talk about The Will of the Many, because if you're going to read one book from this video, I would highly recommend it be this one. This has this ancient Roman setting that is so fascinating. And when I say ancient Rome, it's inspired by ancient Rome. The story follows Viz, an orphan taken under the wing of an elite figure from the powerful hierarchy, and his mission is to infiltrate an elite magical academy, climb its ranks, and uncover the hidden workings of the government. But as Viz soon discovers, nothing about his task will be straightforward. The hierarchy, this dominating empire that has crushed nearly all nations, is built on this rigid social structure. Those at the top of the hierarchy literally draw the willpower out of those below them, and the will is kind of this magical essence. And this creates a system where the elites have access to immense power, and the masses are left with very little. And this, of course, is a critique of societal inequality. And while the will enables these remarkable abilities, it also highlights the exploitation that is inherent in this type of system. So, you know, it's elevated from just a fantasy book with cool powers. There's very much a moral debate to be had here. Despite its nearly 700-page count, this book is very fast-paced. It reads very fast. It's very accessible as well. I will say the beginning takes a little while to get into, so if you're having a hard time reading this one, just push through, because it picks up very fast. And also, if you're a fan of like magical schools and academy settings, then there's a lot to love here as well. This is one of the best magical schools that I've read in a long time. A lot of mystery, and really I think it's done so well in this book. The villains are also a standout. They all feel very human. They're multifaceted. They're not just villains for the sake of being villains. I highly recommend reading it. Now, also, the second book in the Hierarchy series is releasing in late 2025, so now is a great time to give it a read so that you can be up to date when book 2 releases. And next we have The Stand by Stephen King. I am very new to Stephen King. This is my first time really experiencing The Stand. I did watch the 1990 mini-series a long time ago. I was just a kid, so I don't remember a whole lot about it, but it has been an absolute joy listening. I listened to the audiobook for The Stand. Listening to this has been such a joy. It took me a while to get through. It's a pretty big book, but it is really one of America's great epics, I feel like. There are so many memorable characters, so many intense situations in this book that just kept me listening for way longer than I had intended to. And really, this is the book that made me fully understand why Stephen King is one of the most successful and prolific writers out there. Surprisingly, there's a lot of lovable characters you can relate to. You're going to be cheering for them, crying for them. You're going to be very stressed out for them. It's honestly just genius in my opinion. And while I do think it's something that resonates a lot with people now after going through the pandemic and everything, it's also a book that's going to be read for generations and generations to come. I feel like there's a lot of modern books that honestly, they're just going to be forgotten about over time. Not The Stand. The Stand is a classic, and I think it's always going to be. And next up, we need to talk about The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. This is now in my top 10. This is one of my favorite series. I'm so glad I started reading these this year. I would say if I had to pick just one book in the series, I guess Wrath would be my favorite. While the first book, Malice, does take a little bit of time to get into, it's got a lot to set up. Once it finally gets going, this is a series that is very fast-paced, and these are pretty thick books, but they read extremely fast, and also they just get better and better with each book, in my opinion. And the fourth and final book is the best of the best. And one thing that helps with it being so well paced is that the chapters are very short. I love short chapters. Not to mention, almost every chapter ends on a cliffhanger, so you can't simply put the book down. And the thing is too, like, I thought Malice was good, but then I picked up the second book, Valor, and it was incredibly better. And like I said, they just get better and better. I do think you could argue that the third book is the best. There's some reasons why I really enjoyed the fourth book. I think it just wrapped up so well. Even if there were some things that were kind of predictable, it still was just very satisfying. Now, John Gwynne, honestly, he is the master at writing battle scenes. The battles are so vivid, and even if you're not into, you know, reading a battle scene, John Gwynne will change your mind. He writes some of the best action I have read. If you like watching action movies on your fancy 4K TV, that is what The Faithful and the Fallen is. This is 4K action. What am I trying to say? Just go read it. And if that doesn't really sell you on it, thankfully the characters are some of the most lovable characters I have read. I really, truly cared for some of these characters, and I felt a lot of heartbreak in these books as well. I would love to give John Gwynne a standing ovation for how he writes the love between family members and friends. There's also some animal companions that you're going to love just as much as the human characters. I will say his romance, I feel like the romance could have been a little bit better in The Faithful and the Fallen. There is one particular romance that I did really enjoy. I'm trying not to go into any spoilers. Anyway, you just should go and read The Faithful and the Fallen. I know I'm going to be reading more John Gwynne in 2025. And then we have an incredible indie fantasy book that deserves a lot more love, By Blood, By Salt by J.L.O. Dom. For those of you that don't know, I was a judge for SPFBO this year, or last year, which is the self-published fantasy blog off that's hosted by Mark Lawrence. We're now in phase 2 of SPFBO, but in phase 1, the finalist that I chose was By Blood, By Salt. This book really blew me away. I was very inspired reading it. I was highlighting parts on my Kindle that just stood out to me as good writing and that I wanted to use as inspiration for my own writing. So I just kept highlighting so many passages that I just thought was really great writing. Now this is a Middle East inspired fantasy. It has a incredible desert setting. If you love desert fantasy, obviously this is a great choice. And it's also a military fantasy, and it very much exceeds at that. This is book 1 in the Land of Exile series. It follows an outcast debt soldier named Azetla. He's unlawfully in a position of command in the Black Wren Battalion, and this battalion is sent to the Sar Desert to capture a so-called devil. However, this devil is not exactly what everyone expects, and during this mission, he uncovers a conspiracy about the Emperor, which threatens his position and his life. We also follow the Emperor's brother named James, who's kind of being manipulated in 2 different ways, and he is also sent out on this mission. Now, James just wants an idle life while his brother is expanding the kingdom through violence and lies, and James somehow gets manipulated into becoming like the face of a rebellion. And I really found his character arc to be really engaging, and I found that I could actually relate with his character a little bit as well. And O'Dom was in the Marine Corps for 5 years as a linguist, and you can tell her experiences were very influential in writing this book. And right from the beginning, we're greeted with this very beautiful prose as we learn about this festival that's going on that's kind of messed up, but we learn about the traditions and the cultures here, and I just found it so fascinating just right from the get-go, and I really enjoyed the writing style in this book and how much history there is to these cultures and how realistic they felt. And this is very much a book that's realistic. The magic here isn't that prevalent. It's the fantasy elements are kind of low. If you like character-driven fantasy and military fantasy that has a strong camaraderie between the characters, not to mention a desert setting with a very strong sense of culture and history, then you need to read By Blood, By Salt. And then we need to talk about Mushroom Blues by Adrian M. Gibson. I actually just finished reading this one. This is the first novel I read for Phase 2 of SPFBO, and this book is already a very high contender for my finalist in the competition. This was such an interesting novel and such a unique premise. This is a dark sci-fi fungal punk noir crime fiction. And yes, I did just say fungal punk, and that's not just a gimmick. Let me get into it. From page 1, you're immediately immersed in this grunge futuristic world that has the grit and grime of Altered Carbon or Blade Runner, but then it's heavily inspired by Japanese culture and a little bit of Chinese culture as well. The novel takes place 2 years after a devastating defeat in a decade-long spore war, and the island nation of Hopon is now being occupied by the Coprinians, which are humans. The natives of the island, the Hoponese, are fungal citizens. They're basically mushroom humanoids, and the occupiers are exploiting their power. There's food shortages, there's poverty, there's an influx of refugees. But anyway, the main story starts off during a winter storm. As a winter storm looms over the metropolis, and NKPD homicide detective Henrietta Hoffman discovers the remains of a murdered fungal child. She then ends up partnered up with a mushroom-headed patrol officer, Koji Namiko, to investigate the mysterious murders of fungal and half-breed children that continue to spread across the island. Their investigation drags them deep into the seedy underbelly of a war-torn city, one brimming with colonizers, criminal gangs, racial division, and moral decay. And in order to solve the case and unravel the truth, Hoffman must challenge her past and embrace the fungal ways. Now, fungal punk is not an exaggeration here. From the environment and the building materials of mycocrete, fruiting bodies, myco paper lanterns, the entire environment and culture incorporates this. And it makes for a very unique world. Again, I haven't really read anything like this. Now, Detective Hoffman has a fear of fungus and molds, which is kind of understandable in some ways. And she's in this environment where, you know, the people walking around with these mushroom heads that have spores that drift out, and she has to take medication so she doesn't get infected. But she's also very, very unlikable at the beginning of this book. She kind of grows throughout the novel, but she's openly racist to the Hoponese due to some past events. She uses a lot of slurs against them, and she makes a lot of dumb decisions, and just overall, she's very much an unlikable protagonist. And of course, she ends up being teamed up with Namiko, one of these mushroom men, so yeah, she ends up kind of growing as a character. Now, I also really appreciate in this novel how it handles racial tension. There's not one good side. There's terrible people on both sides, and there's good people on both sides as well. Neither side comes out looking like the morally superior. There's good on both sides. It's not just good versus evil. The characters are morally gray, and the book doesn't shy away from the grit that comes with noir fiction. Really, this kind of leans a bit towards grimdark. The prose in this novel is excellent. It's sharp and to the point, but it avoids being dull or basic. I was actually really surprised this was Gibson's first novel, because I really enjoyed the prose here, and it kind of feels a little similar to the Dresden Files. Actually, that reminds me, there's a few like Easter eggs and references in this novel. There's a few references to the Dresden Files, and that's probably what I would compare this book to the most, but it's still very different at the same time. It also makes a reference to Cowboy Bebop, which is one of my favorite animes of all time. So if you are a fan of Cowboy Bebop or the Dresden Files, then that's another high recommendation to read Mushroom Blues. I would probably give it like a 4 out of 5, I would say. I'll make a full review on it soon. And then we have one of the most enjoyable series I read in 2024, and that is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. I ended up listening to the first 5 books in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and the 5th book is probably my favorite. The Butcher's Masquerade is the 5th book, right? I think that one was my favorite, I would say. So that's the one I'm going to put on this list, but all of them are so good. This is a continuous story. I mean, it's very bingeable. I highly recommend the audiobooks for Dungeon Crawler Carl because they are some of the best audiobooks I have listened to, some of the best audio entertainment I have experienced. Jeff Hayes, the narrator, is incredibly talented. I thought there was multiple narrators, but no, there's just one. This is some of the most fun I have had reading in a long time. I highly recommend Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is a lit RPG. It has game mechanics and stuff in it. It has an incredibly absurd premise, and it is absurd, but it is also incredibly thought-provoking as well, surprisingly thought-provoking. Basically, a simplified version of the premise here is that aliens come to Earth and they terraform the whole planet into a massive tiered dungeon, and the few survivors have to enter this dungeon and compete in a game show for, you know, billions of alien life forms that are watching. And Carl and his ex-girlfriend's charismatic cat named Princess Donut enter this dungeon together, and it's their journey as they go up each tier, they level up, they gain achievements, they get new gear, but somehow he doesn't get any pants because the game masters hate him. Or I guess game show isn't the right word, it's reality TV that's being televised to sadistic aliens. Anyways, truly weird premise, I know. I ended up being very surprised at how fully fleshed out the mechanics of the game are and just the world in general. I wasn't expecting it to have so much depth to it, and also the characters are very lovable. They grow throughout the story. There's actually a lot of hard-hitting moments where you realize how messed up of a situation they're in, and it really lands those serious moments with the humor, and there's a lot of humor in these books. I love the sadistic AI that, you know, it narrates all the achievements and everything. As the series progresses, the stakes intensify, the emotional moments are even more hard-hitting. The hysterical duo of Carl and Princess Donut intensifies as well. And yeah, really, this is Princess Donut's show, and she deserves all the respect. And that's why you should read Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's for Princess Donut. Even if you're not a gamer, if you're not into lit RPG, that's completely fine. I think there's a lot to enjoy in this novel. I really just loved the blend of humor, and again, it's one of the most binge-worthy series. You can just fly through these books because they're so enjoyable, so entertaining. Again, highly recommend the audiobooks. And yeah, I'm gonna go start on book 6 very soon. And moving on to Jade City by Fonda Lee. This book, I don't know why it took me so long to get to this one. I feel like everybody is talking about the Greenbone Saga. Everyone's probably over it by now. I'm just starting it, and I've only read book 1. I don't know why I haven't started the second one yet. I like to just start random series. I don't know why. I have so many series like on the go at once. I really should just focus on finishing the ones that I started, but I am going to be starting book 2 very, very soon because this book was excellent. If you want urban fantasy, crime drama, and martial arts all mixed into one, then you need to read Jade City. This is basically a gangster drama set in a fantasy 1950s East Asian city that's kind of reminiscent of like Hong Kong or Taiwan. Now, if you don't know, Jade City is set in the vividly imagined city of Janloon, and the story delves into the power struggles between rival clans, the No Peak and the Mountain, who both vie for control over the precious and magical Jade. And here in this world, Jade is the magic system here. Jade endows its wielders with extraordinary abilities. Now, the plot of this book is very tightly paced. It reads very fast, but it still allows enough breathing room as well. And the setting is so rich and alive. Now, there's a certain cinematic quality to this book that I feel like just works really well. And together with it being a crime drama, I can see why it gets compared to iconic works like The Godfather, but Jade City has its own story to tell. One that explores familial loyalty and honor, how culture and tradition respond in a time of great change. Now, Lee's expertise in martial arts is very evident here in how she crafted the fight scenes, which really adds some authenticity and makes the action feel realistic and believable, and helps you suspend your disbelief even when someone starts using Jade. And even if Jade isn't used that often, it is the driving force of the story, and it's kind of Fonda Lee's justification for the sort of fantastical Eastern martial arts that we know and love from movies starring Jackie Chan and Jet Li. But we learn there's actually a lot of rules governing how Jade works. Now, the character dynamics are another highlight. I really enjoyed how you're not entirely sure who the main character is throughout the novel. And all the characters have so much depth. They have backstories and subtext, and you can tell there's a lot of history between these characters, and it really makes me want to just pick up the second book so I can more thoroughly learn about their backstory. Really, the only kind of flaw that I noticed with this book is that it does have some info dumping and exposition that feels a little clumsy at times. It doesn't have to do with like the characters and their backstories, more so just with the world building. But then Fonda Lee's writing is so smooth and atmospheric that I kind of got past that very quick. It wasn't something I noticed too often, but it's something I took note of. Other than that, I don't have many complaints for Jade City. I'm surprised it took me so long to finally pick it up, but I'm glad I did. Now, these next two books blew my mind. They are so good. I cannot wait for the third book. That is The Book That Wouldn't Burn and The Book That Broke the World by Mark Lawrence. And the third book is coming out this year. I cannot wait. I couldn't pick which one I liked more, so I'm just mentioning them both. This is spoiler free anyway. This is Mark Lawrence at the top of his game. And that's saying a lot. I mean, Lawrence has written a lot of books now, and I haven't read them all yet, but from what I've read, this is probably my favorite so far. Mark Lawrence self-described this series as a love letter to books and the buildings where they live. But not only that, this book has so much depth to it. It speaks on the nature of lies and the price we pay for knowledge. Not to mention various cultural and religious issues. This series has a lot to say. It did take me 2 or 3 attempts of reading the first chapter to finally get hooked on this book, probably just because I had some other books on the go. I couldn't fully focus on this one, but then once I did, something just clicked. Listen, Jorg Ancrath from the Prince of Thorns books is always going to have a place in my heart, but this is the superior series by Lawrence in my opinion. I savored every word of these books, and the story alternates point of views between 2 characters. Lavira, who's an orphan girl from the dust, and she is always seeking knowledge. She's such a great character. I feel like Lawrence is really great at writing female characters. Then we also follow a young man named Avar, and he's trapped in this gigantic library along with his 4 adopted siblings and these 2 android type beings who care for them. And they're all kind of trained for one purpose based on the book they had with them when they first entered the mechanism. A feature of the library that allows a person to absorb a book without necessarily reading it. And there is so much more intricacies to this book and to this library. You don't really understand the full scale of everything until it gets going. And then, you know, there's different dimensions involved, there's different worlds and histories, and it's just, there's so much to this series. My mind was blown. If you love literature, if you love libraries, really, you need to read these. These are a high recommendation from me. Like I said, it's one of my new favorite series, and I'm looking forward to the third book. This next one, I almost forgot. I forgot that I read it early on in the year and not last year, so I can't forget to mention this one. This is one of the highlights of the year for me, and that is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This is a historical horror fantasy novel that's set in the 14th century France during the Black Death. The story follows Thomas, a disgraced knight-turned-brigand who encounters a young girl named Delphine, and this girl claims to have visions that reveal that the plague is part of a larger battle between heaven and hell, with Lucifer orchestrating events to overthrow God. This book has such an eerie atmosphere. It's also beautiful at times. It's a very emotionally driven book, and it exceeds at everything it set out to do so well. Now, this is also a cross-genre masterpiece. It blends elements of fairy tale and fantasy with horror and historical fiction, and it manages to successfully pull that off. Now, even though there's widespread despair, there's like hell on earth happening, it also has a lot of themes of redemption and hope as well. And I really enjoyed seeing that. It kept this from being so grim. Even with horror, you can still have hope in there. In a lot of ways, Between Two Fires actually kind of reminded me of the manga Berserk, just in how dark and eerie and atmospheric it is. And also it kind of reminded me of the Dark Souls games as well. So if you're fans of those, Between Two Fires should really be on your radar. Now, when I say this is a horror novel, it's not like jump scare in your face horror. It's more so the cosmic existential dread, especially if you know a lot about religious history and stuff like that. It gets pretty dark. This is a story of heaven and hell at war for humanity, and at stake is no less than the eternal damnation of every person who has ever lived and ever will live. But all of that is in the background. This is an epic that's told on a human scale. And then we have The Silverblood Promise by James Logan. This is actually a debut novel by James Logan, and consider me a fan now. This is, if you like gritty heist stories with protagonists that have a lot of wit and charm to them, I'd recommend this. If you're a fan of The Lies of Locke Lamora, I'd recommend this. I mean, even the world has some kind of Italian inspiration in there, just like with The Lies of Locke Lamora, but it's not at all like a copy of that. I'm just comparing them here. Now, the novel follows Lucan Gardova, who goes from being the heir to a noble house to a disgraced failure, and he turns to a life of card gambling and drowning his sorrows in wine. Then when he discovers his father has been murdered, leaving him a note containing 3 words written in blood, it leads him on a journey away from seedy taverns to the mother of cities, a city called Safrona. This is a melting pot of cultures and crime syndicates, and here we discover deadly politics and even deadlier monsters and merchant princes. And it's a very breathtaking and memorable setting. He teams up with a street-smart orphan named Flea and a few others, and there's this big mystery they have to uncover. This book really scratches an itch that I love in fantasy. I really enjoy a gritty heist novel that has, you know, rogues, assassins, those type of characters I really enjoy reading about. And I also love when they have that kind of witty banter between them, a lot of camaraderie and a found family. I love seeing a crew in fantasy, and it works really well here. There's some very clever plotting. There's a healthy dose of mystery, which I love. Yeah, I would highly recommend this Silverblood Promise, and I can't wait to read the second book. I believe that's releasing in 2025. Now, I also decided to explore basically a pinnacle of classic pulp fiction fantasy, and that is Jack Vance's The Dying Earth. I have seen so many authors recommend this series or say that it was one of their inspirations for their writing, like Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin, and so many other authors that point towards the Dying Earth books. And I have heard of the Dying Earth, but I never really knew what it was about. I just decided to go into it blind, and I was very surprised. I mean, there's definitely some. The quality of these stories ranges here and there, but there is something about pulp fiction that I love so much that you really don't see in modern fantasy. And I think it's just the fact that the author is more willing to explore imagination and dive into the weird. And I really enjoy that. I mean, a lot of pulp might not have the strongest characters, but it has some incredible imagination at play. And that can be said for The Dying Earth. These stories, man, these are richly imaginative. They're also very atmospheric, and they're set in the distant future where the sun is a dim red orb and magic has replaced technology. And Vance introduces readers to a world teetering on the brink of oblivion. Now, there are several works within The Dying Earth, and it starts off with a collection of short stories that kind of introduces these wizards and these weird creatures. Vance's prose is elegant and evocative, but it's also a little clunky here and there, and he paints a very vivid picture of a world filled with creepy and melancholic deodans, as well as twickmen riding dragonflies, and these morally ambiguous characters that was definitely very fresh for the time. And still, some of the creations that he came up with are unlike anything I've read before. And one of the standout entries in The Dying Earth is Kujal's Saga, or Cudgel's Saga. I don't know how it's pronounced, but Kujal the Clever is such a interesting character to follow. He's very odd. He's a rogue, he's charming, but he's also very, very morally gray. And just an odd character, but I would say Kujal's Saga is my favorite out of the Dying Earth series. I still have some more books to read in this universe. Overall, Dying Earth holds up pretty well, especially once you get to Kujal's Saga. I love the weird, the odd, the eldritch, and the Lovecraftian elements of Dying Earth. That was something I enjoyed so much. And there's a lot of elements that I've kind of gained inspiration from that I'm bringing into my own writing. So really, this has been very valuable reading the Dying Earth books. Again, the quality does vary here and there, but I'd still recommend checking them out. Okay, I wasn't planning this one, but I am going to quickly mention I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle. This is a really lighthearted, whimsical fantasy book. It's a really great palate cleanser. And also, if you're a fan of anything by Beagle, I mean, if you're a fan of The Last Unicorn, this is just more of that. It's more just whimsy and fun, and it's got a lot of those classic fantasy tropes, but he turns them on their head so often, and it was actually really refreshing to read. And when I say it's whimsical, it's also surprisingly dark at times. I wouldn't underestimate this book. This is a master of fantasy back at it again, and it's more of what Beagle does so well. So I highly recommend reading this one if you haven't. And those are the best books that I read in 2024. But what did you read? Let me know in the comments what books you read in 2024. Let me know if you plan on reading any of these this year. I'll have links in the description that will be affiliate links to all these books. Using those helps out the channel, so I really appreciate it. And if you're looking for an extra way to help out the channel, you can check out my Ko-Fi or my Patreon. That's the best way to support the channel here. Also, just dropping a comment and liking the video, that goes a long way as well. Anyways, I'll see you guys soon.